Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this meeting of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee to order. I'm pleased to welcome everyone here for today's hearing on information operations and counter-propaganda capabilities. This hearing will focus on the challenges faced by the Department of Defense and the federal government when dealing with the insidious propaganda and social media messaging coming from groups like Daesh and sadly from countries like Russia, China, and others. Not only do they recruit members, raise money, and sway the opinion of potential allies with this propaganda, but they sow doubt and dissension as a means of preventing or discouraging U.S. military action to protect American families. Last month, our subcommittee held a closed roundtable discussion with outside industry and academic experts to explore this topic. That discussion helped our members better understand some core challenges and concerns, including what are our current capabilities for information operations and counter-propaganda, and how are they being integrated into larger strategies to deal with specific actors like Daesh, Russia, Iran, China, and others. How can new techniques and concepts improve our ability to sense, detect, analyze, and respond to propaganda in the 21st century media environment? What policy changes impair our ability to realize the full potential of these new technologies and concepts? These questions and issues remain relevant in today's hearing. Our panel of expert witnesses will proceed from that starting point and provide us with their thoughts from a governmental perspective on this important topic. Our witnesses before us today are the Honorable Michael Lumpkin, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, the Honorable Matthew Armstrong, Broadcasting Board of Governors, Major General Christopher K. Haas, Director, Special Force Management and Development, United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM, and also a very grateful dad of a Citadel cadet, which I respect very much. And Brigadier General Charles Moore, Deputy Director for Global Operations Joint Staff. I'd like now to turn to my friend, Ranking Member Jim Langevin from Rhode Island for any comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here, for your service to the country, and for all you're doing to keep us safe. The Department of Defense's ability to work in concert with other U.S. government agencies and international entities to effectively counter propaganda is an issue that the members of the subcommittee have been concerned with for some time. And I'm glad, Mr. Chairman, that again, you're holding this hearing. DoD has a long history of countering adversary propaganda and influence in order to further our national security objectives, and it's met with great success. However, unlike World War II or in the 1980s, today's state and non-state actors disseminate their messages far and wide instantaneously, crossing multiple combatant command areas of responsibility and reaching audiences all over the world, including U.S. citizens. Unfortunately, time and distance are no longer on our side. This evolution of the information environment forces us to think about how to approach this issue. Should decision-making within the military chain of command be decentralized so efforts can be more effective in time and space? If so, how do we maintain oversight and synchronization of efforts? Further, how do we take into account privacy, freedom of speech, and other issues as they pertain to U.S. persons and non-adversaries in an environment without boundaries? Essentially, how can we more effectively employ capabilities? As the chairman mentioned, the subcommittee held a roundtable with independent witnesses on the issue several weeks ago, setting the stage for a deeper discussion of the aforementioned issues. Today, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses how they are working to more effectively employ capabilities that we do have and develop even better capabilities and tactics, techniques, and procedures for the future. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our witnesses' testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langevin. I'd like to remind our witnesses that your written statements will be submitted for the record. So we ask that you summarize your comments to 5 minutes or less. And then after that, we will proceed with each member having 5 minutes to ask questions. We have a person who is above reproach Kevin Gates is going to be maintaining the 5-minute rule. And then this is a unique hearing, and so we will actually begin with questionings in reverse order of how the seating, and we would begin with Congresswoman Elise Stefanik when we begin questions. So I'd like to thank again all of you for being here today, and we begin with Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the unique role of the Broadcasting Board of Governors in the United States international media and the role we play in advancing our national interest. I'm pleased to join today's panel alongside my colleagues from the Department of Defense. I have a longer written statement for the record, and I'll summarize that here. This committee knows well that while today's increasingly interconnected world offers us a plethora of opportunity, it also provides challenges. From Crimea to Syria, northern Nigeria, and Southeast Asia, propaganda and censorship have used our increasingly networked world to not just seek to win the news cycle, but to shape the very choices of statecraft. U.S. foreign policy cannot be effective if we do not appreciate how information shapes the actions of policymakers, institutions, and the public. The Broadcasting Board of Governors is a unique tool within this broader context. We are a 24/7 global media organization that oversees non-military international media support, supported by the U.S. government, including the Voice of America, the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, the BBG-funded grantees Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and Middle East Broadcast Network. Our ultimate goal is to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy through top-notch fact-based reporting. We broadcast in 61 languages and reach more than 215 million people each week. We are unique, however, in that we prioritize our content to impact strategic audiences. Many of our reporters are not only from our target markets, but they also maintain extensive networks in them. They speak as locals. They know their audiences deeply. We are called upon to operate in markets until private information dissemination is found to be adequate. Virtually by definition, we target markets that are hard to reach and at best underserved by accessible, reliable, independent media. In short, there is no other agency or corporation like us that puts the audience first, that actively builds true independent media markets in order to one day not to be needed. By unleashing the power of professional journalism, we not only inform foreign publics, we allow individuals to aspire to freedom by offering them a platform to make decisions based on information that is verifiably true. When we cover the successes of free and open elections, as we have recently in Nigeria, for instance, we educate the audiences on how opposition parties can seek power through the ballot. We serve as a key explainer of U.S. policy as well. VOA's charter mandates that our programs present the policies of the United States clearly and effectively, and also present responsible discussions and opinion on these policies. When we train the lens on our own policy discussions, for example, by covering different views on recent negotiations with Iran, we allow the world to see democracy as a constantly evolving work in progress guided by the rule of law. Even simply talking about how Americans go about paying a parking ticket can open the eyes of our audiences. Allow me to use some terms that are not usually associated with the BBG but are familiar to the committee and to my colleagues at the table. The BBG is actively involved in foreign internal defense through empowering the people with the truth and giving them a voice through transparency and accountability. We work by, with, and through local populations by training and equipping local media and individuals to be better journalists. We actively work with some 3,000 affiliate news organizations around the world, including 400 radio stations in Indonesia alone. We are a force multiplier for broader U.S. public diplomacy. We open markets and close societies for fact-based journalism, so the audiences see an alternative future. Our media provide a platform on which the Department of State, the Department of Defense, Agency for International Development, Agriculture, and others can build their own success. As I mentioned earlier, we face an increasingly networked world filled with challenges and opportunities. Let me mention a couple of the core areas we're focused on. One, we're accelerating our shift toward engaged audience in digital platforms, video, mobile, social. Second, we're concentrating efforts in issue areas such as Russia, violent extremism, Iran, China. Third, we're focusing on impact over reach, putting the audience first. We focus on challenging information and internet freedom worldwide, which is an enduring and central role. Through our Internet Anti-Censorship Program and Open Technology Fund, we seek to support journalists, bloggers, civil society actors, and activists to use the Internet safely and without fear of interference. We underwrite apps and programs for computers and mobile devices that help encrypt communications and evade censorship. These efforts have been successful, and we look forward to expanding them. As I close, let me say journalism is a powerful force for change. By acting as the foreign domestic media, the BBG plays a critical role in the lives of the audiences by providing them with news and information in their local language that is relevant to their daily lives. Voice of America's first broadcast stated, "The news may be good or bad. We will tell you the truth." At BBG, we continue to operate with that in mind. Because truth builds trust and credibility, delivering credible news is the most effective counter to propaganda and ignorance, and provides the audience with information that will affect their daily lives and their daily decision-making. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Mr. Armstrong. We now proceed to Secretary Lumpkin.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate this opportunity today to discuss the Department of Defense's role in direct support of the Department of State's efforts in the contested information environment. I'd like to thank this committee for your support in this critical field. I'm pleased to be joined today by Brigadier General Moore and Major General Haas. It's good to have my counterparts here. And in proper reflection of the need of a whole-of-government response to this challenge, I'm honored to sit next to Governor Matt Armstrong from the Broadcasting Board of Governors. I'm here to discuss an aspect of our information operations capabilities that has received special attention from this committee, and that is our Military Information Support Operations Force, which provides a critical capability in support of tactical and operational needs of military requirements, as well as providing support to the overall strategic message effort led by the State Department. The scope of our current challenge in the informational space is unprecedented. In a Washington Post editorial on the threat posed by the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, ISIL, Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs Richard Stengel estimated that only 1% of a potential audience of 1.6 billion people who could be targeted by ISIL's messaging will actually support ISIL's actions. This 1%, while small at first blush, equates to approximately 16 million potential supporters of ISIL's actions around the globe. Even that startling number conceals a critical difference, which is the unfettered geographic and virtual dispersion of this new adversary. Social media and other communications technologies has enabled the virtual and, in some cases, actual mobilization of dispersed and demographically varied audiences around the world. Non-state actors can reach across the globe with multiple, simultaneously targeted and tailored approaches to motivate or manipulate a spectrum of audiences. They do this in numerous languages with messaging designed to specifically influence or motivate them according to their personal beliefs or perceptions, all conducted through smartphone, computer, and an internet connection. In this environment, technology is not limited to one-way broadcasts like television or radio. It allows interactive discussion anytime and in almost any location with virtually unlimited reach. This hyper-connected world has many positive benefits, but the rise of ISIL and the ability for other state and non-state actors to conduct recruitment operations and spread propaganda almost certainly and with minimal cost highlights the dark side, one that requires the whole-of-government response. In this challenging environment, I see two main implications for the Department of Defense. First, the Department does not lead the U.S. government effort or possess the only capabilities in this space. All other civilian departments and agencies have their own roles and missions as part of the government's strategic communications efforts. This demands close interagency coordination and clear understanding of the appropriate roles and complementary nature for each piece of the U.S. government's communication and engagement framework with global audiences. The bottom line is that the Department's efforts alone cannot solve the challenge of this contested information environment and adversary propaganda. But we do have a critical role to play as a contributor of our unique military capabilities and a partner to the whole-of-government effort led by the State Department. Second, the complexity of this environment demands that we use a thoughtful strategic approach to achieve success against differing adversaries. Simply trying to match our adversaries tweet for tweet or website for website is both fiscally irresponsible and operationally ineffective. Instead, we must rely on the skills of our talented workforce to develop thoughtful, well-constructed plans, partnerships with interagency and our international friends, and the use of a variety of means to disrupt the adversary's narrative. We need to expose its contradictions and its falsehoods and ultimately bring credible, persuasive, and truthful information to audiences who have often have significantly different perceptions and cultural norms than our own. We acknowledge and are appreciative of the intent of the language of Section 1056 of the pending NDAA. Thank you for your support of the Department's efforts in this critical space, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Lumpkin. We now proceed to General Haas.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss U.S. Special Operation Command's manning, training, and equipping of the Military Information Support Operations MISO force. Preparing our MISO forces for current and future conflict is a critical role for U.S. SOCOM. The extensive propaganda efforts employed by both ISIL and Russia makes U.S. SOCOM's role in manning, training, and equipping even more critical. We have made significant improvements in all three areas over the last decade, but there is considerable work remaining, particularly improving our MISO forces' capability to influence on the World Wide Web. Now I'd like to address SOCOM's role in manning, training, and equipping. The overall end strength of the two active duty groups is approximately 1,050 officers and enlisted MISO soldiers. The active officer and NCO Corps is appropriately manned with the exception of sergeants at the E5 level, which is below authorized levels. Our projections for recruitment and retention indicate we should have our active duty MISO groups fully manned by FY 2019. The complexity of the mission and the expertise required to carry out MISO missions has shaped an extended selection and training program for our MISO soldiers. They now attend a 2-week selection and 42-week qualification course. This is different from other U.S. government training because it focuses on language, culture, and influence principles. This ensures our soldiers know how to design persuasive arguments, use the right symbols, and identify the best media. This training makes MISO a distinct asset within the Department of Defense. As you well know, our adversaries use the internet to recruit followers, gain financial support, and spread propaganda and misinformation. The current conflicts have identified our need to expand MISO training on the World Wide Web. Through the Joint Requirements process, multiple combatant commands have identified capability gaps in regards to MISO's use of the web. SOCOM is now in the process of developing a comprehensive plan to expand MISO training into social media use, online advertising, web design, and other areas. Maintaining a current MISO equipment capability to meet our operational requirement is also an ongoing effort, but one U.S. SOCOM is well positioned to meet. We have a state-of-the-art media production center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the capability to provide for print, audio, and video production. We are also constantly exploring and developing future MISO capabilities to ensure that we meet the emerging needs of the combatant commanders. U.S. SOCOM welcomes this committee's support regarding technology demonstrations to assess innovative and new technologies for MISO. The web-based technologies we are exploring will be more flexible in nature and provide support to on-site commanders. In closing, SOCOM is committed to meeting the challenges of training and equipping the force while simultaneously addressing our current manning issues. I also want to thank you for your continued support of our SOF personnel and their families. The tremendous demands we have placed on them requires a continued commitment to provide for their well-being and combat readiness. This concludes my opening remarks, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, General Haas. We now proceed to General Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the actions we in the Department of Defense are taking to counter the propaganda campaigns of our enemies. In order to effectively achieve our military objectives and end states, information operations must be inherently integrated with all military plans and activities in order to influence and ultimately alter the behavior of our adversaries and their supporters. To accomplish that goal, there are several capabilities available to commanders, the most common being the employment of our Military Information Support Operation Forces, or MISO forces. MISO personnel have the training and cultural understanding to assess enemy propaganda activities and propose unique solutions that directly support our ability to achieve our military objectives. MISO forces operating from a U.S. Embassy, an operational task force, or a component headquarters are employed to execute DoD missions that support named operations, geographic combatant commander, theater security cooperation efforts, and public diplomacy. How combatant commanders employ their MISO operation capabilities to counter adversarial propaganda is what I understand you want to focus on today. MISO forces are currently deployed to 21 U.S. embassies, working with country teams and interagency partners to challenge adversary IO actions and support broader U.S. government goals. To perform their missions, MISO forces use a variety of mediums, including cyber, print, TV, and radio, to disseminate information in a manner that will change perceptions and subsequently the behavior of the target audiences. Unfortunately, as this is an unclassified hearing, the specific examples that I can discuss are limited. But I do want to provide you some brief examples of the efforts our MISO forces are currently undertaking around the world. In Central Command, MISO efforts are focused on challenging the actions of violent extremist organizations. For example, in Iraq, MISO forces are conducting an advise and assist role to help Iraqi forces learn to develop indigenous military information support operations and counter-propaganda activities. Central Command's online influence strategy is used to counter adversary narratives, shape conditions in the AOR, and to message specific target audiences. These operations include using existing web and social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to support military objectives by shaping perceptions while highlighting ISIL atrocities, coalition responses to ISIL activities, and coalition successes. European Command's efforts include exposing Russian mistruths and their concerted efforts to mislead European audiences as to their true intentions. We're in the final stages of staffing the European Reassurance MISO program, which will provide expanded authorities to conduct MISO training and, in some cases, messaging support to our partners in the region. EUCOM is also looking to expand their engagement with the Broadcasting Board of Governors to further improve their information dissemination capabilities. Ultimately, regardless of the enemies that we face, the Department of Defense understands the criticality of countering an adversary supporters' confidence, conviction, will, decision-making, while shaping behavior supportive of our military objectives. We understand that these actions must be taken while not exceeding the authorities we have been granted, while always operating within the boundaries the Department has been given, and with the close coordination of our interagency partners. Finally, I also want to express my deep appreciation for the committee's unwavering support of our men and women in uniform, to thank you again for the opportunity to appear this afternoon, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Moore. And we now will proceed with the members' questions, and Kevin's going to make sure the clock is properly maintained. And so we will begin, of course, with Congresswoman Elise Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. Secretary Lumpkin, my first question is for you. In October of 2014, the department submitted a report to this committee on future military information operations capabilities as a result of Section 1096 of the FY14 NDAA. Can you give this committee an update on what progress has been made in implementing the findings and recommendations of that report?
Yes, ma'am. We, as mentioned in 2014, we answered that report, and we continue to develop and do this holistic review of how we do business, from everything from the authorities that we have in place to the pieces of how we man, train, and equip, and to then actually how we operationalize our MISO efforts. So this is part of our ongoing process as we're always looking and reevaluating and in dialogue with our interagency partners and with this committee and others on to make sure we have the right oversight and we have the right capabilities in place. So I think we're making good strides. Again, it's a continual challenge to work through, but I think we're doing the right things as we provide oversight and evaluate our capabilities.
I wanted to follow up on the point you made about the authorities. Since we're operating in a very complex IO environment, at a previous hearing, we heard from the witnesses about the lack of clarity of the rules of engagement and of those authorities. Can you talk about some specific improvements that we should be making in order to clarify that?
I firmly believe that Title 10 under U.S. Code gives DOD the authorities it needs to do the information operations that we're required to do to support our current mission in the way. So I'm very comfortable with our authorities in this space. We continue to work with our interagency partners to make sure that we are supporting them in the fullest and most robust way possible. And again, I do believe we have the authorities in place to do what we need to do.
Thank you. My next question is for General Haas. Based on the current projections to reduce Army personnel by about 40,000 people, could you describe what effect these reductions could potentially have on the military information support operations community?
I would respond to that question this way, Congresswoman, is that the command is very concerned about the reduction in the overall size of the United States Army, from which we draw our pool of candidates for our MISO forces. It would be difficult for me to fully quantify that because the Army is currently in that process. But as my commander has expressed in other forums, he is concerned about that drawdown because that does reduce the pool of available candidates and qualified soldiers that we could recruit, select, and train for our MISO force. And so we continually look and try to analyze, exactly what that impact will be over time. As I stated in my opening remarks, we're trying to mitigate some of these concerns through more active recruiting directed specifically at the E5 level to fill our current shortages. And we are looking at other management tools in order to ensure that we retain our best qualified MISO soldiers in order to offset the potential impact of a smaller Army on our community.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. We now proceed to Congressman Ashford of Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions. One general one, and that is in this area of recruiting individuals who can engage in this activity. General, how do you see going forward with the authorities you have and some of the work that's been done in the NDAA? How do you see the private sector's expertise being tapped to raise the level of activity in this area? What's your vision of that?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So SOCOM is exploring and is working on new relationships, not only with the private sector, but with academia in general, trying to certainly garner and understand the skill sets that they can help and provide certainly to our community. So that is an ongoing effort. And we're also partnering as best we can, I think, with the interagency, and we're looking for areas in which to improve that so that we not only have a whole of government approach, but we have maybe a whole of society approach towards improving the quality of our MISO skills, knowledge, and abilities.
And you believe you have adequate legislative authority to undertake those partnerships, I assume? Is it?
I would describe it this way. U.S. SOCOM has the adequate authorities to do our current man, train, and equip mission.
Okay, so we can, well, let me give you an example. Maybe I misinterpreted what Admiral Rogers said, but I think I understood what he was saying in a committee hearing we had. That, so for example, on the military side, we could reach out to the private sector, bring in expertise from the private sector to fill out some of these responsibilities on an interim basis or a short-term basis,
Is that assuming that the standards are adequately adhered to, is that something that you all think could happen?
Well, we obviously understand that the pace of which technology advances, we will probably have to reach out to the private sector in terms of contractors to bring that expertise into the force until we can appropriately train our soldiers, our men and women inside the MISO community to fully understand, understand that new technology. And we're always working that balance between, what's out there in the private sector and what we can then incorporate gain into our community.
Right. I think, let me ask General Moore, could I ask you a question specific about language competency? Hopefully I'm asking I think you talked about that a little bit, but when we were in Iraq with Chairman, there was discussion about, the language, knowing the language, not only knowing the language, but knowing the nuances of the language, the different, and hopefully I'm asking the right, Mr. Secretary, the right person here. Anybody can answer it, but are we that sort of sophisticated, nuanced language training? Is that, do we have adequate resources? You mentioned that's a challenge, or maybe.
Yes, sir. That's more in my lane. And so
Okay.
we spend a significant amount of our time in the qualification course for our MISO soldiers focused on language and culture. So each one of the MISO soldiers is required to graduate with what we call a 1-1 capability in a targeted language. And so that allows them to speak conversationally and read the language. We are focused right now on a number of different languages, but we have the adequate resources within the community to adjust that language and then continually provide sustainment training. But as you know, mastering a language is sometimes a gift, and we look to target our soldiers with that gift and languages to
and do you recruit
beyond 1-1.
Sorry, do you recruit to that as well?
Well, obviously, in order to attend our assessment selection courses, those soldiers have to have an aptitude, high enough score on their language test to enter our courses.
Right.
So we
Thanks.
do test to that.
Thank you for all your work. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ashford. We now proceed to Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you. I always want to acknowledge the folks that wear the uniform and put themselves at risk for the rest of us in terms of even just putting your whole life to the cause of freedom, and I'm grateful to you. Essentially, I guess we're discussing the department's capability today to use the quote here, conducting operations to inform, influence, and shape adversarial behavior in the information environment. That sounds pretty important to me, given the ideological nature of some of the enemy that we face. So I guess my first question is, what do you think represents the best bang for our buck, or the best strategic niche that we can pursue in order to actually change the behavior of our adversaries? And let's see, Secretary Lumpkin, I'll go ahead and begin with you, and if anybody else is would like to take the question on, it'd be great.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think there's two principal aspects for us. Is that one is that as part of DoD's larger strategy, it's all operations, large or small, have an information operation component that supports that particular operation. So it's codified and actually integrated in all operations. So I think that first of all, that's kind of the chapeau so everything we do. The other piece is that our relationships with the interagency, where we look to how we can support our partners who have and bring our unique military capabilities, whether it's print or it's working some other piece, in order to help them in their efforts. So one of our principal role here, outside of doing information operations on operations per se that are uniquely military, is how we support our partners. So I think that's key, and I think that's a huge value we bring as the department.
Well, I've seen a lot of research that shows that one of the challenges that we have with this ideological enemy is that when we try to measure their commitment to their cause, that we sort of have to break it down typically to whether it's a sacred value to them or not. In other words, is this something that they're joining the group just for sort of the adventure, or if this is something that is a deeply held conviction that goes to the religious core of who they are. And I'm just wondering if these are really some of the leadership here is acting on sacred core values. And it doesn't seem like anything we can say to them is going to have a lot of impact, but perhaps our efforts would be redirected at those less committed so that we sort of impact the support base of the true believers, as it were.
No, all good points. It's very interesting. A study was recently done from a Lebanese-based company called Quantum, and it put ISIL in particular people into 9 different bins of people who would join this organization. So it allows for better targeting. And just the quick list of them that I found were interesting. First one was the status seeker, somebody looking for status. The second one was an identity seeker, somebody looking for an identity. Revenge seeker, redemption seeker, responsibility seeker, the thrill seeker, somebody who's looking for ideology, somebody who's looking for justice, and then a death seeker are the 9 different bins. So as things are developed, just as our enemies target specific audiences, we have to, as a U.S. government writ large, have to have unique messages directed towards each of these 9 different bins. I thought this was very informative and very helpful in helping me understand the problem a while back.
Well, actually, that's the point I was really trying to get to, as you probably imagine. And it sounds like that last guy is going to be a little bit recalcitrant. The death seeker doesn't sound to me like someone that's going to be open to a lot of, well, you just had a bad childhood approaches. So I guess then my final question to you is, with apologies for this sequester and what it has done to pretty much the entire military apparatus of this country, do you feel like, and General Hawes, this goes to your testimony, do you feel like the department has the appropriate resources, you sort of touched on it already, but the appropriate resources and programming personnel to successfully execute this current counter-ISIL strategy? Do you think, and if you don't have something that you need, what could we do to make your life easier and more effective against these enemies of freedom?
If I may actually take that question, what I don't have is budget certainty. Yeah. Where I am, I'm trying to come up with a multi-year strategy, because this doesn't happen overnight. In order to influence somebody, to change their mindset, their viewpoints, there's a continual engagement. So I'm trying to do this in a multi-year plan on 1-year money.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for us to make sound and long-term investments in our programming, in our planning to execute information operations without that budget certainty.
Yeah.
And Matt, do you have?
Thank you. It's a similar situation. Yeah. We're not sure what's happening.
Yeah.
Is it possible to take a moment and answer your question as well?
Well, I guess as far as not knowing what's going to happen, given the potential veto or join the club, we don't know, any of us know what's happening. Go ahead, sir. I want to be sensitive to my time here. My time's expired. If the chairman wants to extend the time for you to answer, that's great.
Thank you. So you asked about the audience, or the folks and the different ideological viewpoints and the realities. This is where I emphasize the particular nature of our toolkit, what we bring to the table. The adversaries, and there are a whole bunch of different adversaries we face, unfortunately, right now, and they tend to rely on a say-do gap. They tend to rely on propaganda and a mistelling of history and a mistelling of the present. And they rely on the audience not knowing what the reality is, and they squash the freedom of speech and the freedom to listen. And that's where we're able to intervene and tell them what is actually going on, what is the truth. And then an important element, whether it's an IO, public diplomacy, what we do is the trusted communicator. And we empower the people on the ground that are familiar, whether it's an affiliate radio station or it's an individual that's familiar with the particular potential extremist, to communicate and actually have the truth so that this individual is being impacted from all angles with the reality, what's actually happening. So that's another element where we're coming in.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence there, and I think this gentleman could probably seek a career in political consulting at some point for campaigns afterwards. If you can change these guys' mind and help people see the truth, you got a real future, brother.
And thank you so much, Congressman Franks. And we now proceed to Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask specifically about some of the propaganda activities that we're seeing out there in different regions of the world, Russia, ISIL, and Iran, China. With there being such, with social media itself being such a challenge to counter, rumors and innuendo and myths and what have you, how much can we reasonably expect to be able to challenge some of the things out there that we see from Russia or ISIL or any of these actors that are using social media to really keep things stirred up?
I know from a SOCOM perspective, what we're looking at is how do we become much more proactive? And as I stated in my opening comments, we are undergoing an entire review based on the commander's requests that we take a closer look at what's happening on the internet and social media sites, and how do we help to influence that particular targeted audience via that media. And we've recognized that we're not on there constantly, and do we have the technology to be able to immediately respond and be have a more persistent presence so that we can understand and then provide more comprehensive recommendations to our senior leaders and decision makers regarding the messages and other ways to counter this propaganda. And so that comprehensive review and that look at technology to enable us to do it is ongoing right now, and we're hopeful that by the first quarter FY17 we'll have a better picture of how we're actually going to get after that problem set of being able to be more proactive and be involved in the discourse, continuously, rather than basically shooting behind the target or being in a tweet for a tweet, as the Assistant Secretary said, which we see only validates the message that they're sending out.
If I may add, yes, we have to be proactive. One of the other challenges, and I think the General was getting to this, is we actually have to pay attention to the impact. Rather, the existence of the propaganda itself doesn't mean that there is impact. We have to look at what are they striving for and how do we counter that, how do we respond to that. So often the best counter is an indirect response. So we look at, for example, Iran, and much of the propaganda coming from Iran is trying to destabilize Iraq and Syria and recast. So if we're in there and talking about or engaging on the subject matter of what we're actually doing, what is the reality on the ground there, that's helpful. With Russia, much of the propaganda that surfaces is aimed at destabilizing the West, undermining the trust and credibility of journalism, of government, of NATO, of EU, and all those things. And so we can have a conversation along this other pathway, and we don't match propaganda. Certainly, we don't go tweet for tweet, but we go to the overarching issues where they're having an impact. And with Daesh, same thing. As I mentioned before, there's a say-do gap, and we start to hit the audience on what is the gap, what are they saying, but what's the reality. And this will help impact and reach the audience. And again, we empower that audience so that they start to recognize the propaganda for what it is. It's not effective to tell somebody that's propaganda. You have to get them to internalize and then again, have them be the communicator and share that experience.
In the state of affairs today, with everything going on with Russia, with ISIL, with Iran, trying to keep things stirred up in the region, where should we be focusing most of our efforts as far as it pertains to counter propaganda and counter social media tactics?
Well, sir, that's a difficult question because each one of these is a unique threat, and it's a different environment.
Or who do you think is the most effective out of those players in using the social media to cause discord?
I suspect we'd have different answers from different folks in the different marketplaces. I think each one of these are showing a very critical threat. As I said, the Russian propaganda aimed at the non-Russian audience is aimed at undermining NATO, EU, government, media, and that's a very scary, destabilizing influence if it's actually having the impact, and it's a seeping impact onto the audience. With Daesh, we see the impact of that, and there are questions on the resourcefulness of that. But honestly, I'm not sure that I think that's above my pay grade on where we should be focused. They're each unique threats, and it's based on our foreign policy and where we want to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vesey, and I'll start my 5 minutes, and Kevin's pretty brutal about reminding me of this, which is good, and then we'll proceed to Mr. Langevin. But as we begin, I want to indeed thank Mr. Armstrong, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, for you to have 61 languages. It's very impressive, too, for Voice of America to have persons who are actually proficient in the language, possibly even from in their home community. That just comes across so positive in real world. I want to thank you for that. And then, General Moore, I was grateful to hear that at embassies there are personnel in a positive way monitoring. I minored in journalism. I love print media. When I visit countries around the world, I enjoy picking up local newspapers and seeing what's available. I was in Islamabad, Pakistan a couple of years ago, and it was just a very positive newspaper that I read. It had dispatches from Reuters and from Associated Press. It had advertising giving an indication of a vibrant consumer society and competition. But then I got to the op-ed page, and there was a hate-filled column, and it was ridiculous. It was insane. And it was specifically about how the American military spends all of its time targeting mosques, hospitals, schools, to achieve the maximum number of civilian mass murder. And I thought, this is so insulting. I mean, to the intelligence, am I reading it? Who wrote it? And I looked, Fidel Castro. So it was somewhat discredited when I found out who the author was, but entirely. But we've just got to be vigilant because somebody might believe the total and utter propaganda that I saw. With that in mind, Secretary Lumpkin, how closely are the activities of our information operations capabilities and people linked with the cyber operation capabilities and personnel?
I'm going to defer to General Moore on that question.
That's fine. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Thank you for the question. They're extremely closely linked. As has been indicated several times so far in the discussions that we've been having, organizations like ISIL are very, very dependent upon using the cyber capabilities or the internet, social media, to everything from command and control, disperse their propaganda, foreign fighter flow, and communications with regards to that, funding efforts, etc. So they are inherently linked. And as you're aware, Mr. Chairman, I know cyber is just one of the many information-related capabilities that's part of a broader information operation paradigm or structure. And so all those things occur simultaneously.
Well, we appreciate the effort very, very much. And General Haas, is there an overarching DOD or federal government strategy to counter information operations and propaganda? How effective has it been? Or if not, what lack of strategy hindering our ability to take meaningful actions in the information environment?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to defer to the Assistant
This is
Secretary.
good. Hey, this is great. I want the right person to answer the question.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the question. Again, State Department is the lead for the whole of government, U.S. government response in working in the information space. On the counterterrorism part, they have the CSCC, which manages that, and the rest is done through the the bureaus at state is how they manage the regional messages. And we provide direct support. Again, in the CSCC, for example, there's 20 some odd people who are working that particular mission set, and we're providing about 25% of them detailed over to the Department of State to assist them in that mission. So we're very closely linked within the interagency with our partners as we continue to work this challenging environment. And again, going back to the DoD's strategy, not only is the interagency piece, but as what I mentioned earlier, is that piece where every one of our operations has an information operation component to it.
Well, thank you very much. And Secretary, I appreciate you pointing out that the ISIL target may be only 1%, but that's 16 million people. And sadly, in my home state, we had a shooting at Ebenezer AME Church. It was somewhat of a backhanded compliment to the people of my state that the murderer identified he could not find people locally who agree with him. But what motivated him was going on the internet and finding people. And so what I had hoped would be liberating of internet can actually produce an extraordinary danger to American citizens. And I now proceed to Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to again thank our witnesses for your testimony. So if I could, Secretary, maybe we can do a little deeper dive on the whole of government approach, how information is managed, and can you talk more specifically, say from the strategic to down to the tactical, how we're managing the information and the way in which State Department has input into this, as well as the IC in terms of messaging and again how the information flows and how it's managed.
I appreciate the question, sir. Again, State Department has the lead, so they set the conditions internationally. As far as the messaging piece, we at DoD, we execute and support, tactical or operational level military operations. We do that as we continue to work with the State Department and the larger message sets. Now, the intelligence community, what they're doing is they're continually watching our adversaries' actions and to see what they're doing, and which feeds back into the process of we know what they're doing and how they're responding. The two principal challenges we have in this space within the department is that, one, the speed of technology and what our adversaries are able to do with it, so we're always adjusting and shifting. And there's also the assessment piece that we do all the time, because we have to assess if our actions are actually working. And one of the challenges we have that's kind of unique to this space is that when something doesn't happen, something bad doesn't happen, that's frequently we know we're successful. So we're trying to validate something that didn't happen. So it's a challenge, but as we work in the overall structure within the whole of government approach, that's always feeding back in as far as the whole process as we work with the IC, the state, and the DoD's component in there.
Is state properly resourced? And again, they have soldiers of the lead on this, but the capabilities are in the hands of DoD. Are they properly resourced to help to manage the information flow?
I think it's outside of my lane to talk about State Department resourcing. That said, the fact that we have 25% of the CSCC detailed to fill critical positions over there tells me they don't have the manpower to put against the mission like they would. That's my guess, but I would defer to State for a more satisfying answer.
Okay, no, that insight is helpful, and I appreciate the answer. So, Secretary, ISIL is waging, obviously, an information operations campaign using social media that has proven effective in recruiting new fighters, obtaining financing, and generally strengthening their political and strategic goals while undermining U.S. and other regional partners' objectives. ISIL also uses open sources for command and control, and their broad use of social media has reinvigorated discussion, obviously, of DoD's role and effectiveness in the information operations environment. So a little more, drilling down a bit more on this topic, our Department of Defense's policies and directives keeping pace with the ever-evolving information environment, and what reviews and discussions are taking place within Department of Defense and whole of government to increase effectiveness of military operations to counter propaganda, and our new tactics, techniques, and procedures being developed.
We are doing continual self-evaluation, not just within the Department of Defense, but the interagency writ large. As a matter of fact, I sat in a meeting yesterday with Secretary Carter and Secretary Kerry, and this was one of the topics that we discussed, is that how we continue to work better to counter and show the true nature of ISIL, and to make sure we're leveraging every asset, authority that we have collectively between our two organizations to continue to show the world what ISIL really is. So it's a continual process, and we look forward to our continued work with the committee here. If we do identify new needs or authorities, we will come to you asking for those.
Fair enough. And I just, since my time is running out, I won't ask, I'll wait till if we go to a second round of questions, but to Mr. Frank's question, the topic that he had raised, and Mr. Armstrong, you talked about these trusted partners and seeking them out and making sure that the message is communicated, and Secretary, your point of exposing ISIL for what they are, identifying those credible voices, particularly, for example, President al-Sisi and the speech that he gave to the religious community and the admonition that he gave. Those are the types of things that help to convey the message of a counterbalance to what the message an organization like ISIL is trying to convey. So with that, I'll yield back since my time is.
And thank you, Ranking Member Langevin. We now proceed to Congresswoman Stefanik.
My question is for Mr. Armstrong. We've talked a lot today about the importance of countering propaganda with a credible voice, and you mentioned that in your testimony. But during a CODEL I was on earlier this year in Jordan specifically, much of the leadership discussed the importance of the fact that this is a long-term generational struggle. And again, instead of talking about our strategies for being reactive, what do we need to be doing to make sure that our IO capabilities are more proactive? I know that's a broad question, but I think it's an important one looking 5, 10, and a generation down the line.
Thank you for the question. Because of the nature of my agency, I'm going to restate the question slightly, because we don't do information operations, but the information environment. It's important that the value of information, the value of the conversation, the value of journalism, the freedom to speak and the freedom to listen, and that empowerment to the audience is maintained over the years. This agency is Voice of America. It was started in the 1940s, 1942, and it's always had a fundamental purpose of empowering people through the access to news and information, and that was a fundamental counter to propaganda. It was access to the truth. So I think the one answer is acknowledging that information matters. We forget that. It seems to come and go in waves. 2, appreciate that in the United States we have a fundamental appreciation of the press. And there's a reason why, because it's fundamental to a democratic process. And however, whatever flavor of democracy that is, they're very important. They're a voice for the people. 3, that the people actually matter and that they need a voice, not just the quote, formal journalist. And then I would add another is that our interagency partners can use us more, that they can be available to us to get on because of our access to the audience. They can come on and they can speak to a vast audience much greater than simply standing at a podium and hoping that a Western media will convey that story to a foreign domestic audience that's a target audience, or that local media, which often does not have a global reach and does not understand the context of the statement, of, say, Secretary Kerry or the President or whoever it's going to be, and that they utilize us more because we can help unpack that story.
General Haas, did you want to comment on that question?
Well, SOCOM specifically is working on not only the interagency aspect of this problem set, as the Secretary said, but we're also very focused on building reliable partnerships, which we see as critical to really informing us about this generational issue. And so we spend a lot of time at SOCOM and within our tactical forces building those important, reliable, international partnerships that we'll need to better inform us for the future.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful answers. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Stefanik. I think an unheralded positive story has been the military information support operations. And I think it would be very helpful for General Haas, General Moore, possibly Secretary Lumpkin, if y'all could explain how these are developed and what has been the experience for the last 14 years.
As far as the training and equipping, et cetera, that I know Major General Haas can get into the specifics for you there. But I will tell you that they've been absolutely critical, especially as I mentioned in some of the opening statements in our embassies, to help advance the capabilities of a lot of the governments and all of the military organizations that we've been helping in terms of building their partnership capacities so that they can deal with these problems on their own, which of course I know you understand ties right into really what our goals are in places like Iraq right now, which is to let them work these issues from the inside out. So I think that they've been invaluable, and we will continue to use them whenever they're requested by the chiefs of mission and supported by the relevant combatant commanders. Major General Haas.
The successes as well as the lessons learned had helped us inform SOCOM and how do we adjust our assessment selection process as well as our qualification process for our MISO soldiers. So every 2 years we do a detailed review based not only on the successes that we're seeing in the AFRICOM AOR with hunting Joseph Kony to what we're experiencing in the Pacific AOR or the Central Command AOR to help us refine the actual classes of instruction and the skills and attributes that we want to build into our MISO force. So they have been very informative over the last decade, and they will continue to inform us in the future. So we're fielding a MISO force that meets the requirements of the specific combatant commanders. And if we have to, for example, adjust a language requirement based on an emerging requirement, then we have the capability to do that. And I think the flexibility within our system to adjust to meet that emerging requirement.
And as I conclude, I want to thank you all. And it's something that was always something that was meaningful to me. By getting proper information out, it promotes a level of stability and certainly robs people who have ill intent to their local community and us. And I think of, in coordination with the United States Agency for International Development, I wish more people knew about that too. What was so inspiring to me on my 11 visits, 12, to Afghanistan, to see the number of signs that were by road signs next to buildings of the clasped hands, U.S. flag, the flag of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And a point that always impressed me, many of these signs were rusty. They've been there a long time. And if people found that resentful of the schools being built, the hospitals being built, the bridges being built, they could take the signs down. So there's so much good, and I always quote Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and that is my first visit to Afghanistan, that good news has no feet and bad news has wings. So good luck, and to the Board of Governors, please get all this corrected. I now go to Councilman Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess, one final question. I'd go to General Haas. General, can you please describe to the extent that you can in unclassified forum the current information-related capabilities to counter propaganda and social media? Which are most effective, in your opinion, and why? And what challenges do forces face in employment of these capabilities? And how are these challenges being addressed? And what capabilities are being developed in the future? For the future, I should say.
Thank you for the question, sir. If I could break that down and
Sure.
answer it, your first part was,
Yeah, which of the capabilities that you can, to the extent that you can talk about in open forum, which are most effective and why?
thank you. So, as I said in my opening comment, I think the most important capabilities that we bring is our language and cultural understanding, as well as the training that we provide to our MISO soldiers on how to conduct influence ops, particularly in the 21 deployed military information support teams that General Moore talked about. That's one of the distinct capabilities that we help bring to the country team and the interagency, is this cultural understanding and awareness, as well as this language capability. Now, as I stated, we're looking to the future is addressing the internet-based operations of the future. And we, in a different forum, we would be more than happy to discuss what we're determining in that current assessment of our capability gaps and where we see an opportunity to fill or close those gaps in our current capabilities.
Okay. Thanks, General. And I guess, you know, related to this, the other part of my question was what challenges do forces face in employment of these capabilities, and how are the challenges being addressed?
Well, I believe there's multiple challenges depending upon which region of the world we're deployed. I think we have a great relationship with our interagency partners in this area, and I think our combatant commanders, without speaking for them, based on what they have identified, is that we're probably not capable or doing enough on the internet or the web, and that's what they have specifically asked us to address, those challenges. As to the other challenges, I'd have to defer that to my joint staff partner or those specific combat commands that are employing our MISO forces out there today.
Anybody else want to comment on the challenges?
Sir, I think Major General Haas covered it quite well, but if we take a look, like you said, it really depends on what area of the world we're talking about. If we want to take ISIL, for example, like we've said, their abilities using social media, using cyber capabilities is really one of their centers of gravity. And it's the speed at which you can operate, an individual person can operate. It's the depth at which they can reach into a population. They can do it 24/7, 365 days a year. And so it's how do you keep up and combat the speed at which that message may be getting out. Yeah. So it's not just about the message itself. It's also tied into the speed at which they can get that message out and they can update it.
So how challenged are we with respect to the language barriers? I would imagine that this is something that we've accounted for, and I know we focus a lot on developing and enhancing our linguistic capabilities, but you know, how is that hampering our ability?
Where we're not fluent in the language, sir, I think the challenge is we rely on interpreters. And we train our soldiers in how to work with interpreters, but once again, it could potentially be an actual, you know, a foreign national or a local national that's providing that data. And therefore, it's not that individual operator who has the fluency in the language to be able to provide those recommendations, options, course of actions for how we should do counter-propaganda. It's coming through an interpreter. So we're always working on trying to improve our language skills within our MISO community.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Chairman. I'll yield back. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And again, for each of you, we are very, very grateful for your service. You make a difference to promote a level of stability, which is so important, not just for American families, but for people around the world. With this, we now conclude, and we are adjourned.